undisputed king and queen of the ice.
People are Torvill and Dean-tastic. They have one of the most successful television shows on TV right now.
And at the heart of that show is their unforgettable routine, Bolero. It's 25 years ago to the day that Torvill and Dean won Olympic gold and gave British sport one of its finest hours.
It was absolutely amazing.
That will be a moment in history forever.
Behind Bolero is the story of two people who were determined to be the best.
We had to keep going and pushing ourselves.
The first time we skated, I mean, it was here.
Here in Nottingham.
When you are the best at what you do, that in itself drives you even more.
This seems a long while ago now.
Who would have thought 25 years on, we'd still be around?
This is the story of Torvill and Dean's Bolero.
It's skating legends Jane Torvill and Christopher Dean.
Today, Jane and Chris are still making history. Their Olympic sport is now prime-time television viewing, with 10 million of us tuning in every week.
Dancing on Ice would not be Dancing on Ice without Torvill and Dean. It would just be another skating reality talent show.
They've now been let loose on a whole new generation of kids that didn't even know who Torvill and Dean were.
And the whole of Dancing on Ice is inspired by a single moment that happened a quarter of a century ago.
It was actually on the 14th of February, 1984, that we won the Olympics, skating to Bolero. 25 years on, you know, there's a TV show called Dancing on Ice, but where that show ends, it ends in the contestants performing a version of Bolero.
It was always special because it was the routine that we won the Olympics with. But I think it's come back full circle, and it's very special that, you know, people are still talking about it.
It's been given its whole new life to it again, that it keeps on going and going.
To be able to choreograph and perform a Bolero in front of Chris and Jane is an absolute, kind of honour, really.
We tried to emulate what they did, for sure, but, you know, what Jane, that was magic. That was something really, really special, and I don't think ever again, no one else will emulate what they had at that moment, at that time on the ice.
Chris and Jane's Bolero at the 1984 Olympics was a moment of perfection, never seen before or since.
Every sport has its defining moment when it shifts, and Bolero was that moment for ice dance.
It is still remembered as probably one of the greatest ice skating routines ever.
It was like something really married that day to make a piece of magic and a piece of history.
Their flawless performance was rewarded with ice dancing's first ever 12 perfect sixes and ensured gold for Great Britain.
As I grew up, it was something that I knew about and that, you know, my parents told me about, and once upon a time this happened.
After the Olympics, 500,000 people lined the streets of Nottingham to welcome their champions home.
Chris, what do you think of it all here?
It's too much, really. Really didn't expect all these people.
Bolero had turned Chris and Jane into national heroes. For them, it was the culmination of everything they'd worked for.
I think at that moment, you know, we knew we got the gold medal, but I don't think it really sank in that, you know, for all the hours and years you work to get there, that here you are finally.
Thank you, really, thank you very, very much.
As you're looking at each other, it's not that you're just thinking about in that moment. It's almost that film reel of seeing your whole life happening, and it was there and then, and this seems so important to you because everything that had come to this point, this pinnacle.
For our Olympic champions, it was a journey which had begun way back in the 60s. Once upon a time, Chris was a fresh-faced little boy living in a mining town just outside Nottingham.
This is Collier Road. This is the road that my dad walked for, gosh, 20 years. I remember as a kid I'd always be looking out the window, watching for him walking down the street. It's only when you look back that you think, gosh, the places you might have gone, and then the places you did go. I think I would most probably been a coal miner, like my dad, if things had have just continued. Wow. It's been a long time since I've been here.
Having taken Dancing on Ice into its 4th series, Chris and Jane are proving week in, week out that they've still got what it takes to be Britain's biggest ice stars.
What Torvill and Dean did, they took ice skating from being what I thought was a sport to being theatre.
Every time they perform, you feel like you're witnessing something really, really special.
It's incredible to watch, especially when you're on the sidelines as another skater working alongside them. It's a real privilege.
34 years together means that Chris and Jane have one of the most successful and enduring relationships in show business.
They have such respect for one another, and I think that's what is so lovely to see. It just works after all these years. It's like two pieces of the jigsaw that just fit so perfectly together.
Can you then turn and put 2 hands on here?
It wasn't one day that suddenly you have this. It's evolved. We met as kids. We've gone through so much, and emotionally we're like brother and sister, or even closer than that. It's a weird relationship.
And it's a relationship that's often been pushed to its limits on the road to victory in the past, and even now on Dancing on Ice, as the celebrity routines are choreographed meticulously.
Once he gets on the ice, he's kind of like an excited, child. When he was choreographing our routines, it's literally non-stop. It's like he has all these ideas in his head, and rather than think about them, he just skates them. He's like relentless.
I think Chris, his personality is a lot more fiery, and he's impatient. You know, whilst he's happy to work for hours, he wants to get it right.
Round, hook, keep twisting, give me that hand.
If I'm worried about something, I tend to back off and close down, whereas Chris shouts at people.
Go on, go down.
What am I doing?
In the air.
She's not in the air.
He's just picked her up.
No, but she's going to get up really quickly.
And she's going to go.
I don't know what made me so obsessive, but it's just when I do something, I do it, and I need to do it the best I can do it.
It's the combination of Chris's fiery imagination and Jane's calm expertise which makes the partnership work.
Nothing will ever faze Jane, and that's what makes them so special. She can take the most extreme situation. You're going to go out for an Olympic gold. She's totally calm.
Move the bits.
I can certainly understand why they were so good, because they had this partnership where they were so dedicated to being the best. And when you've got that dedication and you've got that talent as well, then you're going to get success.
Step forward like she did there.
By 1976, just 1 year after teaming up, Torvill and Dean were starting to make their mark on the skating circuit.
Well, I'd just changed to skate with Karen Barber, and Chris started to skate with Jane, and I'd been beating him, and then he beat me, so I did notice it at the time as something quite significant.
Then, in 1978, Torvill and Dean won their first major competition. It was their first steps on the road to gold, but for the time being, they were still two ordinary people trying to lead ordinary lives.
We realised that our partnership was taking over our lives. We didn't really know how long it was going to continue, because we both still had our own jobs, and Chris's job was training to be a policeman, so that was quite important to him.
Oh yes, you heard right. Whilst winning trophies on the ice, Chris was also a British bobby, protecting the citizens of Nottingham.
I started skating when I was 10 years old, so I was skating first, but that was just recreational. It wasn't something that I was ever going to do seriously, but this was going to be my real job. Yeah, I was going to be a policeman.
Chris spent 7 years as a policeman, working from here, Nottingham Central.
When I was doing the job, I thought it was one of the best jobs ever. You know, it was exciting, it was mundane, but at the same time, it was really fascinating.
Your name is?
Christopher Dean. I used to work here a long time ago.
Many years ago.
Many years ago.
Who are you visiting?
Everybody.
Personally, I think it gave me a really good introduction to life, you know, because I saw a lot of life before I went into this skating stuff.
Well,
how are you, Tony? For goodness sake, how are you doing? How are you, mate?
Well done, mate.
Good to see you.
And you.
It's great to see you guys.
For his workmates, Officer Dean, the ice dancing copper, had a certain novelty value.
Chris didn't talk about it, really.
There weren't too many skating policemen at that time, was there?
I think it was, I mean, it was before, we discussed this as well before you came here today, and we thought, you did keep it quiet.
Did I?
Was it sequins and...
Tight catsuits, I think.
Catsuits.
Yeah.
You seem to have your two lives at that stage.
No, they're definitely two separate entities.
Yeah.
That, and somehow, you know, I want to keep them going. I wanted them to mesh. A policeman seemed a great opportunity to me, and the thought of quitting my job and going skating was completely a different mindset. It was a lot for me to say to myself, you're going to be unemployed, and you're just going to go skating.
This end here, do you remember, used to be the Vice Squad?
We started moving up in the ranks and we were getting better, but at the same time, you know, I was still working as a police cadet and a policeman.
Yeah, this was the back entrance. This was the cell block at that time.
I wonder how many of those prisoners now might look back and remember who... I got Nick. I got Nick, Christopher Dean.
I think most of them were pretty drunk at the time.
Chris's beat in Nottingham was the Old Town Square. Funnily enough, it was overlooked by the Norwich Union building, where Jane worked as an insurance clerk. Her office has now been turned into a pub, possibly as a tribute to Jane, but we're not really sure.
Wow, this is different. There's no desks anymore. She said, see if you recognise anyone. I said, yes, I do, absolutely.
Hello, Jane.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Oh, gosh, this is just completely different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where's our desks? I know, where have they gone?
Jane worked in the motor claims department with Pat and Leslie.
Well, I first met Jane in 1974. Initially, we knew nothing whatsoever about her skating. It was only a couple of months later that we actually, you know, found out she did a bit of skating.
We'd seen how tired you were trying to combine a job along with training.
Well, we knew you couldn't carry on like that for a while.
It was, yeah, it was hard.
We felt so sorry for her because where the rest of us had come to work and then go home and feet up, do nothing, they were off skating.
Every spare moment for the copper and the insurance clerk was spent at the rink for all-important training time.
A pair of them were both devoted to skating. I mean, they didn't go anywhere else or do anything else. They would skate, 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 skate.
Working around Chris's police schedule was the toughest challenge. Sometimes it meant getting on the ice for a few hours before work at 4 a.m. Other times, they'd have to wait for Chris to finish his shift, which meant they wouldn't get on the ice until after 10.
They would skate throughout the night. Other times, as foamy as Christmas Day, kind of go down and open up and let them in.
Their dedication, their discipline was amazing. We all had jobs at that time, you know. Financially, you really had to work to support your skating. But they had a dedication kind of way above the rest of us.
It was also around this time that Chris and Jane began working with a new trainer.
They were totally dedicated. They wanted to win, but on the other hand, they wanted to be very good at what they were doing.
Betty she was like our Miss Jean Brodie. She sort of gave us etiquette lessons and
how to behave off the ice as well as on the ice. So we were two kids from Nottingham, you know.
Just occasionally you had a little fraction on the ice.
A spat?
Just, yes.
No.
But immediately you stepped off that rink.
It was gone.
It was gone. I had to explain to them, on the ice you behave. If you have an argument, wait until you get off the ice. Don't show it to the judges or to any of the other skaters.
It wasn't just skating. Certainly Betty told us that, you know, that you're always on display. It was how you dressed, how you held yourself, how, you know, we weren't tracksuit people, we weren't chewing gum people. And when we hit the ice, you know, we were ready. Everything was right in its place. I think we should start when we get to here. This little routine that we threw together. Don't expect too much.
I was very lucky that I found a couple that was so nice, nothing went to their heads. And even now, they're big stars, but they're still basically the same.
Very good. But I've got one tiny little grumble. The landing of your second lift.
Free leg?
Free leg.
Bit swingy.
Yes, and all
bottom.
Like that, all bottom.
Oh, no.
We'll rectify that.
Yeah, do that.
In 1980, the insurance clerk and the policeman competed at the Winter Olympics in America. The part-time skaters managed a very respectable 5th place.
That's when you could see, I would say for the first time, that they were going to be great. You could see together they were two skaters who, two skaters but one.
Chris and Jane's baby success put them at a crossroads. To go any further, they knew they would have to commit 100%. So, in the summer of 1980, they finally quit their jobs and dedicated their lives to ice skating.
That's where Norwich Union used to be.
That's where I used to work.
And
I don't know whether I was
I'd be walking around the square, and we kind of go, right?
2 days later, it was all gone. The hat that I'd been putting on and the uniform, you hand them all back. It's like you hand back your life. It was a real revelation for me to feel suddenly unemployed and just doing this skating thing.
The gamble had paid off. Just a year later, they won their first European Championship.
What was the feeling on winning that crown?
It's hard to describe the feeling. It took us a couple of days for it to sink in. You know, it's still quite unbelievable at the moment.
And with success came fame. Overnight, Torvill and Dean turned into Britain's skating celebrities. Jane and Chris's ice dancing had taken on a new confidence, pushing the boundaries with dazzling routines like Mac and Mabel and Barnum. They began to take on the skating world their way.
When they come up with new routines and they're doing lifts that you haven't seen before, you know there's something different.
They were very creative, and it was something that we all tried to copy. Whatever they did that year, we tried to do something similar the following year. We were always a year behind them.
The trophies were piling up. British, European and World Championships followed, one after the other, year after year. Their routines were the highlight of every competition. Whatever they did was just magic.
There's something about when they skate that it actually connects with you inside. Their souls come out and you feel them.
Torvill and Dean had won just about everything. Now the big prize was in their sights, the Olympics.
What really drove them was to win. They didn't want to be second or third, they wanted to win.
We are now official relics, yes?
Relics.
February 14th to us, to a lot of people it's Valentine's Day, but to us it's Bolero Day.
He was in town.
Bolero has become like a very special thing. I think it's become more special as the years have gone by. I mean, you know, people are still talking about it. Aha. I recognise those. Wow.
Gosh, I can't believe it. It's 25 years old. You most probably could get back into that.
You mean most probably?
The more we progressed, everything became integral. The musical choice, the costume choice, the choreography. From our point of view, it's like looking at a beautiful picture or reading a book that has a start, middle and end. Come on, Jane, hold it up.
Okay.
Dun, 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 dun.
You don't have to sing. Please don't sing.
It doesn't look radical at all now, but at the time, it was skating fashion at the
Maybe
cutting edge.
We were trendsetters, do you think?
At one time, yeah.
We can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends behind. 'Cause your friends don't dance.
By 1983, Torvill and Dean were more than just trendsetters. They were world champions 3 times over and at the top of their game. Now their sights were set on the upcoming Olympics, and the world was waiting to see what they'd come up with next.
Well, one thing you've been doing, Chris, is working on this new routine. Can you tell us something about it?
Well, each year we've always done something different, and we've expected, people have expected us to do something different. And for us,
And each year we would always try and reinvent ourselves. That was our thing, that we didn't want to keep doing the same thing.
The people that were right behind us, you know, they were pushing us all the time, and we didn't want to sort of do something predictable and they might come up with something amazing. So we had to keep, you know, going and pushing ourselves.
With expectations mounting from all sides, Chris and Jane set out to do something bigger, better and more daring than anything they'd done before.
Hello!
Jane, Chris, how lovely to see you. Lovely.
For the Olympics, as with every new routine, their first job was to find the right music.
We were always on the lookout for music, and through yourselves, we got an introduction into the record library, that we could come and listen to all your records and go, yeah, no, no. And we would go through that.
For us. It was a dream come true. We
Yeah.
were like in a chocolate factory because it was like all these records.
We had a fantastic library at BBC Radio Nottingham. It was the largest library outside London, and they were just so thrilled. I remember the conversation when they said, do you think we could come in the library and listen to music? And of course we said, of course you can. We're not going to stand in your way, for goodness sake. And then they would come to us very sheepishly and say, we've got this record, do you think we could take it home? When you did the Bolero, everybody stood up and cheered, but there was slightly, I thought, oh. Oh.
Yeah, it was completely different, I think, wasn't it? And
Bolero was a total surprise. And really, when you think about it, all I thought of Bolero was from a film which Dudley Moore was involved in. And I thought, which was a bit, you know, didn't seem the right thing for Jane and Chris to be dancing to be honest with you.
Bolero hadn't actually been Chris and Jane's first choice either. They'd unveiled their original choice of music to Bobby Thompson, a close friend and mentor from the ice skating world.
Christopher said, I've got the music for the Olympics. So he puts the music on, and it was 42nd Street. And I thought, my God, they can't do this. It's too close to Mac and Mabel, Barnet, all in that same kind of area. For the Olympics, it's got to be something outstandingly different to anything they've ever done. And with that, he went to the car, brought a load of tapes up, put them on. We were putting one in after the other. And Bolero came on, and we just went, that is the one.
the people that were in the room, we knew that that was it. And suddenly it became, there was no other music that was right after that.
So it's hard to imagine now, but Torvill and Dean almost skated to this music from 42nd Street. Instead, what they gave us was ice skating's unforgettable anthem, Ravel's Bolero.
As famous as it was before, they took that piece of music to another level. They did for the piece of music what the piece of music did for them, kind of thing. So it was a lovely marriage.
There is something about that piece of music. There is no other piece of music in the whole of ice skating I could hum to you. That one, absolutely, truly iconic.
I really like the start. It goes bum ba da da dum da 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 dum bum bum ba da da dum da 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 dum dum
da 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 dum da da da.
The
music really kind of gets you, especially when you're skating. It's really kind of, it's weird. It kind of takes over you.
It's passion. It's beauty. As soon as it starts up, it sends shivers down my spine. It's just amazing. It's that dun 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 that really just sets you off into taking you somewhere else. Oh God, it's just so yummy. My favourite bits are dum da la la da, dum da la la da,
da da dum, da 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 dum. That's the bit I remember the most.
So there you go. It was obviously the right choice. But Chris and Jane had a problem. Ravel's original composition was a massive 17 minutes long. Olympic rules stipulate that no skating program can be longer than 4 minutes. While trying to solve this problem, Chris and Jane inadvertently came up with the most memorable moments of their legendary routine.
When people talk about Bolero, it's like, you know, the beginning position and the end position that they remember. But at the time, it wasn't like we've got to build an iconic position. How do we start this and how do we end it?
It all came about when they began to cut down the music. They approached a composer to help them with their ice dancing dilemma.
What was required was to sort of truncate it so that it lasted for 4 minutes with all the elements that are in the original. It was a bit of a challenge.
The creative threesome locked themselves in Richard's studio to rebuild and re-record the whole piece. But after 3 days, all they could manage was 4 minutes and 28 seconds. It was still too long.
We couldn't shorten it anymore without losing the feeling of it. They had to figure a way out of living with it.
How they lived with it was to bend the rules of ice dancing by starting their skating performance for the first time in history without actually skating.
The interpretation of the rules were, we stop the stopwatch when you start to skate. Or the definition of skating is when your blades are on the ice. So by necessity, we started on our knees. And so they became iconic positions for us.
It was so different to what anybody had ever done in ice dancing. That's the kind of people they are. That's why they're so great.
It was that. Nobody's ever done that before. Why haven't we thought of doing that? So from that first moment where they actually kneel before the music starts, it was already different.
Torvill and Dean's dream routine was almost complete. They'd found the perfect music, they'd created the iconic beginning, and their big finish was in place. There was just one thing left to do: create the choreography for everything else in between.
It's a complete story. It was real to us. It's what we needed.
With Bolero, we needed a story and a feeling that would build up a feeling of anticipation and passion to get to the end and bring people along with you.
It was a bit of a Romeo and Juliet story, really. It was, you know, two people that couldn't be together, and this was sort of their last dance, and they were climbing up the volcano and jumping into eternity together.
Throughout this whole routine, we looked at each other quite intensely, didn't we, the whole time?
It was about us. It was about
us.
our eye contact, and we wanted people to feel that they were watching something very intimate.
I hold that routine entirely responsible for the fact that I grew up thinking that they were a couple. It's like a love story, you know, they're sort of with each other and then away from each other, and that bit at the beginning where they almost look like they're going to kiss and they don't.
You wanted to believe that the love that you were seeing on the ice, it had to be real. They had to be madly in love with each other. Surely there's no way you could pretend to be that passionately in love.
And at the time, most of the country, including myself, believed they were an item. They were everything the hungry press pack could ask for. They were the boy and girl next door, never seen apart. Surely they were calm and cool on the ice, but hot and steamy off it.
I assumed they had been a couple and were no longer. I felt that all the way through. You thought, this is not all acting. This really is you two do like each other a lot.
People were like, you know, the next question on everybody's lips and what everybody was mad about was, are they going to get married? Will he pop the question? I mean, I remember it. You know, will they get married on the ice?
People are nudging them to get married. Do you think that is their future or not?
No, yes, eventually, but not to rush it now. I think they'll get married, and I hope they do.
I think it might spoil their relationship.
Why?
Well, married couple argue.
Even Torvill and Dean, as ever the diplomats in cravats, played the game and kept us all guessing.
There have been suggestions that you may soon decide to make your personal relationship a more permanent one. Is there any truth in that?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should ask the other people that's been saying it.
I think you always hoped that they'd be married and they'd have children who would then ice skate, and they'd just be this big kind of partridge family of skating people.
And I guess for us, Chris and Jane had that perfect relationship. They were in sync, they were together, they looked great together, they just were as one.
We've been brought up on fairy tales. When two people look like they are so in love, you want the fantasy, because it's achievable, it's real, I could have it.
Sorry, Britain, there is no fairy tale ending. Our Romeo and Juliet actually went off and married other people. And according to them, they were never more than just good friends.
People didn't want to think it was over after we stepped off the ice. And, I mean, it wasn't over. I mean, there is a love there still is, but it's not the kind of love where you get married.
She is my best friend in the world. Of course, I look after her and I'm concerned for her and all of those things. But it was never taken to a romantic place, you know. The romantic place was done through the acting, through the ice, through people's imaginations, I think.
Do you think this is the Dean bit or the Torvill bit?
It's the backhand, it must be the Dean.
Finally, Chris and Jane's Bolero was complete. Now they wanted to test other people's reactions to it, so they summoned an eager press corps to Nottingham for an exclusive unveiling.
We were absolutely intrigued, as you can imagine. We had no idea what they were going to do. We all met in Nottingham, and he was very enthusiastic about the programme, but he didn't tell us what it was. He said, we're going to go over to the rink and skate it for you. So we went over to this shadowy rink, and then this bump, 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 and the girl behind me covering it for The Guardian, she said, my God, it's Bolero.
For many, Torvill and Dean had gone too far. From the moment they got down on their knees, the choreography was condemned as too daring. Not only that, Chris and Jane were going to be the first competitors ever to dance to just one piece of music.
In ice dancing, it is very traditional in as much as it had to be to a strict tempo. You had to have at least 2 changes of musical style and tempo within one routine.
They pushed it so far, the risk was that people would say, well, this isn't ice dancing, so we'll mark it as illegal.
They'd never seen anything like that before, and I think people were just having criticisms because it was different.
Different or not, Chris and Jane were determined to stand by their Bolero.
Is it still ice dancing?
I don't know that. I think that's for the judges to decide.
But are you worried?
Well, we like to please whatever we're doing, but it's not worrying us what we're doing.
We heard the concerns, but we felt we were definitely on that Bolero bus, and there was no stopping it.
By the time the Olympics came around, Torvill and Dean were ice dancing celebrities, famous all over the world.
Well, by then, by '84, they had a huge reputation.
With Jane and Chris, there were 4 years of audience behind them and people watching them, and they became part of people's vocabulary leading up to the Olympics.
But with Britain's expectations running so high and a controversial routine to perform, the pressure was on for them to deliver the goods.
It wasn't a question of will they win, it was a question of how well will they win.
The media were always saying, how many sixes do you think you're going to get? And, you know, to think we've got to get sixes, you're just giving yourself that extra pressure.
The Winter Olympics that year were held in Sarajevo in former Yugoslavia. The rest of the team were in place well before the Games began, But the stars of the show, Chris and Jane, were allowed to arrive fashionably late.
Torvill and Dean came with the German team on their special train. We went down to the station. I could see this train coming in now, it's from the snow, and somebody said, "They've arrived." And I thought, yes, they've arrived. Now we can start.
The games opened in spectacular fashion on the 8th of February. A very proud Christopher Dean carried the flag for the British team, and for once, Jane was 6 paces behind.
You don't actually realise that you're at this big event, and maybe that was a good thing for us because it kept us grounded, as it were, and not overwhelmed by it.
After 6 days of competing in the early ice dancing heats, Chris and Jane were holding first position against the Russians and the Americans. Now, the big day arrived, the free dance, the final. Chris and Jane went into their normal pre-competition routine.
It's almost like clockwork, I guess. We know we go to the rink at this time, we get there, start you warm up. We can hear the applause in the arena, but we're not really in the arena.
Don't listen to the marks.
We don't listen to anybody's marks, fingers in ears. Don't need to hear what other people are getting.
As 50,000 people watched in the arena, Chris and Jane finally took their place on the ice.
It was like, okay, this is it. Help.
You know, we trained ourselves to that point. We were finely tuned athletes.
Back home in England, the streets emptied as 24 million people gathered around their TV sets, held their breath, and waited for Bolero to begin.
I remember being completely transfixed, and it moved me. It was the first time I felt really, really moved by watching ice skaters do anything.
They had this special contact with each other, and Bolero was the one thing that could bring it out. I don't think they realised that Bolero was them.
Bolero means to me probably the greatest moment in ice dancing ever. It was just a total experience. And one that I'll never forget.
The the thing was such a complete masterpiece. You either had to accept it or say, we're just as nice dancing. And nobody was prepared to do that, frankly.
When the march went up, it just blew the roof off.
That night, the international judges gave Torvill and Dean 12 straight sixes, a score which has never been seen before or since in ice dancing.
I remember standing up in my front room and, I mean, screaming. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
You knew that what was going on in your house, in your living room, was going on everywhere else as well.
It was a wonderful experience. They deserved every minute of it.
It was just amazing. The noise, and it was like, I felt like I was watching someone else, that it wasn't me, you know.
Torvill and Dean returned to Great Britain as heroes. They proved to all of us that not only could our tiny country perform, but we could also excel in an international arena.
They wanted us to know that, you know, they were proud of what we'd done.
And that made us realize that they'd taken us to their hearts, I think. I think that's what had happened. We conquered the mountain, and it was one of those moments that you'll never forget.
Well, our celebrities have certainly got a hard act to follow, and to celebrate those 25 years since Torvill and Dean's victory at the Olympics, we're winding the clock back to the 1980s for Dancing on Ice tomorrow at 5 to 7.